Guys, I have a confession. I'm in love. I've been covering a lot about Drake in recent months, and I did just do a video on Nickelback recently too, so I thought I'd shift my attention to another Canadian artist, the wonderful indie pop band from Prince Edward Island, Always. If you're not familiar, Always is a quintet that got their start in the early 2010s. Their self-titled debut from 2014 was received quite positively, notably due to its invigorating approach to dream pop and jangle pop, and coming in at only 9 tracks on the standard edition, it's an economical listen that's devoid of fluff and filler. Archie Marry Me was a commercial standout, but a lot of these tracks went off live, especially as Always hit the stage in 2015 for Glastonbury and 2016 for Coachella, testing the waters of their new tracks as they continued to perform into 2017. Their sophomore record, Antisocialites, released in the fall of that year, to just as much, if not more, acclaim than their debut, inviting darker elements of their dream pop sound into the fold, creating a weight and density that was more mystifying than that of its predecessor. Which brings us to Blue Rev, their long-awaited third record that was released in the fall of 2022. Upon release, this album received overwhelmingly positive reviews from critics and fans alike, with many deeming it a masterpiece. Their most explorative record to date, the indie pop foundations clash with the shoegaziness quite well, providing an emotional and exhilarating listening experience. And I, in 2022, really liked it, but I don't think I was fair to it. October 2022 was a mammoth month for music. The same day that Always dropped, you had Quavo and the Late Takeoff's joint album. Then the very next week came the 1975, Lil Baby, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And then the very next week after that came Arctic Monkeys, and of course, the biggest blockbuster event of the year, Taylor Swift's Midnights. Just to add context, personally, the place that I was at in my life was a very interesting one. I was planning a wedding, I was gearing up for a major life change, and my career was starting to blossom in ways that it hadn't before. There was a safety in playing Taylor Swift back then, and to be fair, it's a really good album. But that intense need to explore kept ringing in my brain. And the moment that I heard After the Earthquake for the first time in my car in February 2023, I found myself instantly attracted to it. Drawn in by the chime-like guitars, impossibly speedy backbeat, and Molly Rankin's heavenly vocals, I make every excuse to drive somewhere for like 2 months just so I could hear this song. I just had this adoration and admiration for how this song could make me feel in such a short amount of time. I know it's cliche to say something in the art realm makes you feel like flying, but After the Earthquake provided me that feeling, especially in a time when I feel like I needed to challenge the idea of stasis and comfort in my music listening. But instead of that infatuation and short-term obsession fading as I proceeded to revert to my normal habits, I just couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to what I originally listened to in October 2022. And that's when I found myself bound to this record. If After the Earthquake was the gateway to my infatuation with Blue Rev, then Pharmacist, Easy on Your Own, and Tom Verlaine solidified my attachment to it. My uncle once said to me that you don't have to understand every message in music, but just knowing that the message is there, it connects us and binds us to the artist, so much so that it becomes a shared auditory experience. And with these 3 songs, while maybe I didn't excavate the meaning behind Alec and Molly's themes and songwriting, I truly felt the message there, and I repeatedly went back to it to understand more about myself and how the general vibe made me feel. This return over and over happened in the context of road trips, writing sessions, contemplative walks, you name it, I was probably listening to these songs. The roaring guitars and chaotic solos, the soothing bass lines, the groove-based drum passages, culminating into a swooningly authentic mixture that provides consistent euphoria, notably when you're still peeling back the many layers of these instrumentals. But as good as that euphoria is, I knew it wouldn't last. I knew I wouldn't hear these songs so many times and feel as good about them as I did in this moment. So that's when I decided to dig deeper. Diving deep into this album and actually dissecting its lyrical and thematic depth, that comes with a desire to get to know its conflicts. Essentially, it's about focus, particularly on all sides of the composition, not just the aspects that got you in the door. So that can be boiled down to the simple question of, Why did they do this? Now, what I found in my experience listening to music over the years is that there's a difference between suspecting and analyzing. The former is incredibly easy to do due to the subjective nature of art itself, but the latter is a little trickier because it invites a supplementation and recontextualization of one's own worldviews and experiences. I once told a friend that the greatest music ever made are the works that make us feel nostalgic for a life that we didn't live. To me, the best storytellers of all time are able to provide that, because they create a piece of art that pushes us to substitute our viewpoint for theirs. And I think Blue Rev is 100% in that conversation. Upon listening to this album again and again, there's a tangible pain at the center of it, one that was met with an equal amount of comfort. Velveteen is a perfect example of one end of that spectrum, where Molly sings of things that she can't quite make sense of, but is willing to let it slide because she knows that the pain it will cause her if she truly understands. A feeling that, if you take the song at face value, you don't fully get because you're so fully immersed in the blossoming 80s synth-tinged instrumental. Belinda Says also speaks of the simultaneous feeling of being abandoned and trapped in the event that love isn't the fairy tale it's cracked up to be. Again, this is a riff of Belinda Carlisle's Heaven is a Place on Earth, a quite happy song. So seeing that flipped in the context of the themes that Molly writes about here, it not only helps us take her pain and empathize with it, but it allows us to make connections to our own pain. So through this devotion of learning more about this album, I found myself clicking with the band's realistic portrayal of these ideas, even if it wasn't entirely my experience. But also through this devotion, you get to see sides that you didn't know were apparent before. Very Online Guy was a kookier track that I didn't really pay too much attention to when I gave my first listen to this album, but through an inspection of the motifs that Molly plays with here, the social satire points to a wickedly funny and splendidly ironic sense of humor behind the heavier themes. I personally laughed out loud at the line, "Andy loves a patio," as kind of a middle finger to the phone eats first type of people, where all that matters is the clicks and the likes and the fake public perception. Obviously, in the social media age, we all do this from time to time, and there's no problem with that, at least if you're not doing it all the time. But Molly is brilliantly pointing to what happens when online guys do become a problem, not just for us, but for themselves. But the lyrics that have me tethered to this album and hanging on every word of its thesis were easy on your own. 'Cause we're always crawling in monochromatic hallways, dream we pull a 180 someday. It really says everything there. The pure idea of existence is said to be chaotic or whatever, but I also think that existence can be dread. Dread over what might stand in the way of our goals. Dread over the plethora of paths that we can take or lack thereof. And that feeling is communicated beautifully in this line. So it was at this point where I found myself completely committed to this record and it was not going to leave my heart and mind. Yet what happened after was super interesting. As I said earlier, I'm a huge pop fan. I love me some Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Olivia Rodrigo, and I'm a huge rap guy, as you can see from my multiple videos about the Kendrick Lamar-Drake beef. That being said, it's very simple to just be content with the music taste you have, and that's that. But I've never been one to do that. Music is a constantly evolving art form that demands reinvention and revitalization from its artists. And by that same token, the art form needs that from its audience. And I know I'm not the first person to listen to jangle pop or dream pop, but for me and my musical tastes, my love for Blue Rev is a monumental moment. Because now I'm steering out into a space that I've never wandered, nurturing my taste in music and my growth as a participant in this art form by diving into artist discographies that I never gave a second look. I'm excited to get into Frankie Cosmos and Angel Olsen, and I've scratched the surface of Soccer Mommy, Snail Mail, and Japanese Breakfast, but that's the thing, it's only been at the surface level. So thanks to Blue Rev and the impact it's had on me, why not seek out other albums and songs that could provide that same feeling that this album provided me? Because that leads to the final emotion that I experienced during this process. Knowing you have something or someone that you can depend on is peace and stability at its best. And honestly, it's what most people seek to achieve and some people have a hard time finding. Music is very similar in that regard, as it's a breathing life form within itself that we can interact with and use for assistance in time of need, of happiness in a time of celebration, of therapy in a time of sadness and rejection. So to be able to connect with an album on such a huge level, where it reaches that bin of music in your mind that you keep returning back to with every moment, with every emotion, every event, that's exceedingly special and extraordinary. Blue Rev is there now, and I know I'll always be able to go back to it because I'll be reminded of that infatuation, that devotion, that excitement. And it's not just the buzzsaw guitars, the decadent synths, Molly's delightful voice, or the stunning rhythm section that keeps the record chugging along. It's what this album evokes in us, a reconciliation of youth and coming to terms with growth and change. In fact, isn't that what we do as day-to-day music listeners? We're still the same, and we still mostly love the same music that we loved 10 years ago, but things happen, we grow, we move on, we evolve, and this album is the personification of that.
Looking back, I should have known all the nights that I spent.
This might be my favorite album of the decade so far, next to Renaissance, but that's for clearly different reasons. Blue Rev is a superb record that is perfectly written, expertly produced, skillfully performed, achingly human, and one of the best modern examples of dream pop, shoegaze, and jangle pop that blends these elements so stylishly and almost comes off as a completely new take on the genre altogether. So if you haven't heard this album, what are you doing watching me? Go, listen to it right now. Alright, that's all I got. See ya!